Welcome to the tutorial for 1-2, Invasion of Naboo. This level is relatively straightforward with some challenging platforming sections. We've given this level a difficulty rating of 4 and an RNG rating of 3. There is micro RNG with droid spawns and the damage they do to you, but it is usually irrelevant. This level will contain refresh rate changes, which can depend on your operating system, so be sure to watch the setup video before this one. When you see the screen wipe begin, jump slash with both players. Your players will be unable to move for around a second upon entering any transition in the game, but they can input other actions, so the jump slash will help you gain some distance while you are immobile. Head up with both players and don't worry about any initial droids. Once you get close to the tree, a pack of droids will appear. Force push them with player 2 and move into the corner with player 1. Turn player 1 around so he's facing the camera and start to backflip by holding up on the D-pad and spamming jump. This alignment is important on player 1 since you need a very particular angle to get a backflip off of the tree collision. We will break this next section up into two setups, the 50Hz strat and the 48Hz strat. In order to determine which strat you should use, first identify your operating system. If you are on Windows 10, the 50Hz strat is recommended, as alt-tabbing is a quick and easy action. However, if you are on Windows 11, the 48Hz strat is recommended, as you will be forced to press Ctrl-Alt-Delete to switch refresh rates, and 48Hz skips the need to swap refresh rates within the level. First, we will discuss the 50Hz strat. While backflipping, player 2 will move between here and here repeatedly to walk over the spot on the ground, which is around here. This allows your backflipping player to catch the collision. You should only need 3 full backflips to make it high enough, but you can even make it up with just 2. Once you see that player 1 has enough height to land on top of the tree, hold Alt and press Tab, then press Shift, then Tab again. For this strat, in the pre-run setup, we set our game to 50Hz and queued 60Hz. 50Hz is required to climb up the tree, but 60Hz is required to clip through the tree to go out of bounds. Once we Alt-Tab, the game will switch from 50 back to 60, making the refresh rate change highly convenient. Once you're tabbed back into the game, move player 1 to the middle and further from the camera on the tree. If player 1 is too far left or too close to the camera and you force the tree, he will not clip out of bounds. Once you have player 1 in the correct spot, force the tree with player 2. Ensure that you stop moving momentarily as the tree is clipping you out. If done correctly, your player atop the tree will clip out of bounds. Next, we will discuss the 48Hz strat. During the setup process, you may have used CRU to add 50Hz or 40Hz to your refresh rates. In that program, you may also add 48Hz if you have space. However, if you are having issues with adding 48 or just CRU in general, use the 50Hz strat instead, Ctrl-Alt-Deleting instead of Alt-Tabbing. On refresh rates below 50Hz, you are actually able to both climb up the tree and clip out of bounds, skipping the need to switch to 60Hz at all. This saves either an Alt-Tab or a Ctrl-Alt-Delete, depending on your operating system, and can save between 1 and 4 seconds depending on the speed of your refresh rate changes. For the 48Hz setup, turn around as normal and begin backflipping. The key difference will be your positioning with player 2. Run from this point on the ground against the wall over to this point, turning around and running back to the initial point if you do not make it up the tree instantly. Once you have made it up the tree, move forward on top of the tree until you are here. Begin forcing the tree with player 2 and stop moving with player 1. Just before the tree is about to clip you into the ground, start moving forward again with player 2. This is essential to clipping out of bounds, as standing still can cause your player to fail the clip on 48Hz, like so. Note that you can also use 40Hz for this method, however the player 2 positioning will look like this instead if you do. If you opted for this method rather than the 50Hz method, you will switch back to 60Hz during the end cutscene of the level. Continue with both players, and once we get to the MTT, we have the first auto dropout of the run. Auto dropouts are caused when a player is off screen and has collision blocking their path to the on-screen player. This causes the game to automatically drop out the player left behind, cutting out the time it takes to manually drop the player out in the pause menu. It's worth noting that if you auto drop out a controller player, you will not be able to call in on that same controller. There are 2 ways to remedy this state. The first option is to call in on any other input device device, whether that's the keyboard or even a different controller. Once you've called in on a different device, the controller that you initially auto-dropped out will be accessible again. The second option is to press a button on a second controller, which will move the stored auto-dropout state to that controller instead, letting you call back in on your initial controller as normal. Stay on the left side with player 1 while you leave player 2 behind. Once player 2 is dropped out, it's very important that you don't jump up with player 1 too early. The trigger for the Jar Jar cutscene extends out of bounds, so don't jump until right before you reach the stairs. Once you see Qui-Gon's character icon below the stairs, jump in bounds and progress to the next room. Upon entering room 2, call in player 2 and switch player 1 to Jar Jar. We need Jar Jar for this section since he jumps higher and runs faster than both Jedi, making this platforming possible. Force the bridge with player 2, and once it's finished, drop him out. The next section has some tricky platforming. We will show the fastest strats, but if you don't feel comfortable with those quite yet, we'll also show you some easier alternatives. Before jumping up to this platform, have Jar Jar take off from the right side of the rock here. This helps you give enough time before the platform falls to make it across. Do a spaced double jump across, and once you land, do a buffered double jump to get onto the next platform. First, let's discuss the beginner strat. Once you bring down the last platform, turn around and call in player 2. Bring player 2 over and force these two droids. Then force the platform and have player 1 enter the next room. For the advanced strat, continue until you get to this indent in the wall. Jump holding down right to first get around this wall, then switch to this angle for your double jump to make it up top. This next jump uses a tech called edge jumping. An edge jump is jumping late enough off of the edge so that it almost looks like your character isn't even on the ground anymore. Hold this angle with your first jump, then hold right and space your double jump to make it across. If you miss the first Jar Jar jump, there are two backups. The harder and faster backup is to get to this corner by the platform and do a spaced double jump around it. You can also jump back up to where you took off from and switch to a Jedi to force the lever and bring down the other platform. For the beginner strat, force the log with player 2 and drop him out, while player 1 jumps onto the log as it falls. From here, you can continue on as normal with Jar Jar. For the advanced strat, the next room will begin with log jump. Get an edge jump off of this bottom corner and hold straight right while doing a double jump. This angle may feel unintuitive, so trust the camera to rotate in the air and hold directly right until you are here. Then cut upright at the last second to make it up top. If you miss log jump, call in player 2 to force the log while you are respawning. Jump around the log as it is falling and drop player 2 out. From here, stay on the left side of the room while continuously jumping with Jar Jar. Running in the water slows you down, and the jumping also helps with dodging the droid's shots. Grab this power up and do a buffer jump off the edge here to make it up top. If you fail to make it up, jump from this side of the rock. For beginners, take this route to make your way to the platform at the end of the room. For more advanced players, use this movement, cutting off the corner with a spaced jump to take a more direct line to the platform. When you reach the platform, stand on it and wait until it lowers to enter the end room. At the beginner level, the rest of the level is very simple. Stay near the right side of the room to keep a good line, and make sure to jump over the water before hitting the end trigger to avoid being slowed down. There is a slightly faster end room strat that's very advanced and not recommended for most runners. Dropemnastek is a drop-in warp that will send your players closer to the end of the room and closer to the end level trigger. While standing on the falling platform in the previous room, start panning the camera up. Once you get past these first set of plants on the right, do 2 quick double jumps with Jar Jar. Then land and wait a split second to buffer a single jump. While you're doing this jump, you should be moving towards the center of the room. When you land from your single jump, buffer another jump to perform a big jump. At the peak of the big jump, call in player 2 and instantly turn around with player 1. Continue panning the camera up, and if done correctly, you will get auto-swapped from Jar Jar to Qui-Gon. Continue holding down to hit the transition. If you do not get auto-swapped, simply double jump with player 1 towards the camera to get him off screen. Note that performing this trick will cause you to have both players in for the first room of the next level, which will require a different strat. Note that the drop-in warp will only work if you are past this point in the room, so executing the movement too quickly can cause it to fail. If you see this case, you are too early with your call-in or too fast with your movement. Ensure you are dropping player 2 in at the peak of your jump so that they are off screen. If you don't get auto-swap to your player waiting at the end of the level, you did not turn around quickly enough. Sometimes, you may bump into this droid during your final jump and miss the trick. This can happen because the droid is pushing you backwards, resulting in you calling in too early in the room. If you notice this droid hit you, you may play it safe and abort the trick entirely. If you performed ICS on a refresh rate below 50 Hz, switch your refresh rate back to 60 during this end cutscene. On Windows 10, simply Alt-Tab Shift-Tab to switch back. On Windows 11, you will need to press Ctrl-Alt-Delete and spam Escape to switch back, like so. You can either do this with default binds, or rebind your Ctrl-Alt-Delete and Escape keys to do this. This concludes the Invasion of Naboo tutorial.